Hi, I'm Igor Smirnov and I'm glad to welcome you to the next lesson of the Breaking Stereotypes series. Here I'd like to discuss an exchange of the Fianchettoed bishop. You know, this is one of the most common stereotypes for sure. Lots of chess players think that it's always useful to trade an opponent's Fianchettoed bishop. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say black castled kingside and has a Fianchettoed bishop there. Obviously, this is only a part of position. In such situations, a lot of players try hard to trade this Fianchettoed bishop. So, when they play white, they start making moves something like bishop f4, then queen d2 and bishop h6, trying to exchange this Fianchettoed bishop. They believe that this gives them great attacking chances. However, often it's incorrect and often it's rather a time wasting, because you see that white needs to make several moves just to exchange two equal bishops. Very often black has a lot of pieces around his king, something like this. So if you trade one of these pieces, it doesn't really favor your attack, and it doesn't make your future attack successful. A success of your attack depends on an activity of your position in a whole, and a single piece is not so important here. An exchange of the Fianchettoed bishop is nearly always useful just in one situation. If you can start the attack on the h-file by pushing the pawn there and trade the pawns on the h-file, so this will look like this. In such situations, you really need to exchange the g7 bishop, because you're going to penetrate the black's territory by using the h6 and the h8 squares, while the black bishop covers these squares. So if you can't develop an attack on the h-file, then you really need to exchange the g7 bishop, and this is a correct idea in most of the situations. Okay, now let's analyze some concrete examples, and then we'll discuss this idea in more details. In this position, white played bishop h6. I'm pretty sure that quite a lot of players would make the same move. At the same time, this is a huge mistake. Here, I'm going to tell you the key idea. When you're trying to exchange two pieces, first of all, you should compare their activity. And of course, you should try to exchange your less active pieces on an opponent's more active pieces. This is the key idea, and you should orient on this most of all. Like in this position, we can see that the bishop on the e3 is much more active than the black's passive bishop on the g7, which has no possible moves at all. So of course the move bishop h6, which spans two tempos just to trade his active bishop, is a huge mistake. Okay, let's see what happened in the game. Bishop h6, exchange, bishop takes, a4. I don't comment on these moves too much, they are not important for us. Then knight g3. You see that white is trying to bring the pieces to the king side and develop an attack there somehow. White believes that the position of the black's king is weakened because of an exchange of a Fianchettoed bishop. However, it's not correct. Black has a lot of pieces around his king. The knight on f6, pawn on e5, queen e7, and so on. Therefore, we may say that the black's dark squares are not weak really, because white has no practical way to use these weaknesses somehow. h6, rook e1, here let's say knight c5, and after all black got even a slightly better situation. The white's remaining bishop on the d3 is quite passive. Also white has weaknesses on the dark squares, d4, f4. In the future black will try to use them. Since white has no dark squared bishop, it will be difficult for white to protect these squares. And these are all the results of the white's incorrect planned bishop h6 trying to start an attack on the king side. Now let's go back and we'll see what could happen if white choosing the correct plan. Here is the starting position of this example again. Let's see what happen if white do all the same moves just except bishop h6. If white just takes on the e5, then plays a4, b4, knight e2, and then here something like c3, taking the black's weak pawns on the queen side. Then after b takes and queen takes, we can see that the white's position is very good. Black has weak pawns there on the queen side and a lot of weaknesses around them. The black's bishop on the g-zone is totally passive and out of game, while the white's dark squared bishop is making a really good job. It controls a lot of squares on the black's territory and creates an unpleasant pressure on the black's position. Now white has a very comfortable situation, and in the future white will simply attack all the black's weak pawns and squares. Okay, now let's go to the next example. Okay, here is the next example, and in this position black also played queen d-zone, trying to prepare the move bishop h3. By the way, the black's player is quite a strong player. I guess he's a grandmaster. At the same time, I hope that you understand that here the move queen d-zone with an idea of bishop h3 is incorrect. This is a really bad idea. Black needs to make 1, 2, 3 moves just to exchange his active bishop on the e6 on his passive counterpart on the g2. Certainly this can't be a good idea. Okay, let's see what happened then. f4, c6, king h1, and here black made this mistake, bishop h3. Again, first it's a time wasting, secondly it trades more active piece on an opponent's less active one, and finally in this situation it allows white to play f5, which gives white good attacking possibilities on the king side and a space advantage. Now after bishop takes and king takes, white got a very nice position. Then he'll play bishop g5, maybe h3 g4, and he can develop a pawn assault there, and in any case white has a very good situation. And this happened only because of the black's mistake bishop h3. Instead, black could play something normal like knight a6, finishing the development and getting an unclear position with mutual chances. Here is the next example, and in this position black played bishop h3. It's quite the same mistake as we have seen in the previous games. In this position, since the white's central pawns are on the light squares, the white's f3 bishop is not very much active. So we may say that it's a bad piece in this pawn structure, and that's why the black's idea of playing bishop h3 rather helps white to trade his passive bishop. White played a5 first and then bishop g2. Black took there, then a6. Okay, I'll make the following moves quickly. It doesn't matter too much. I just want to show you how bad it will be for black very soon. f4, knight takes, bishop f4, f6, knight a4. Now white simply is attacking the black's weak squares. Queen h5, bishop e5, then queen g4, and the white's position is winning. In the final position you can see that black has a lot of troubles on the light squares. Black created this situation by himself when he played bishop h3, trying to exchange the white's fianchettoed bishop. Now let's discuss the same situation from another side. Sometimes your opponent tries to exchange your fianchettoed bishop. What should you do in this case? Here black played bishop h3. This idea is quite okay for black. The white's g2 bishop is very active, it's putting pressure on the black's queen side, and that's why black is trying to exchange it. So again, what should you do when you're playing white and your opponent is trying to trade your fianchettoed bishop? There is a general rule which states that you need to put your pawns mainly your central pawns, on the color of your exchanged bishop. That's why in this position white played e4. This is a pretty powerful idea, and it has a few strong reasons. The first reason is that when you place your pawns on the same color as your exchanged bishop, this covers the weaknesses around your king. In the future, white also can play f3, and therefore you prevent an eventual attack of your opponent. The second reason is that you make your remaining bishop very active, because since you place your pawns on the light squares, your dark squared bishop will have a lot of free space. And the final reason is that you keep your opponent's remaining bishop passive. Now you fix his pawns on the dark squares, and therefore his dark squared bishop will be very passive during the whole game. Okay, let's make a few next moves. Bishop takes, g6, h4. White is keep realizing his plan. He's going to play h5 and put one more pawn on the light square. Bishop g7, h5, g5, and after knight d5, white got a stable advantage. Of course, black has no attacking chances on the king side, and in the future white will just use all the weaknesses in the black's position and will continue his attack on the queen side. In this position, black just played queen d7, and probably he is preparing bishop h3 move. How should white react? What do you think? Actually, you know the answer already. When your opponent is trying to exchange your fianchettoed bishop, you should place your pawns on the color of this exchanged bishop. Therefore, white should place his pawns on the light squares. He played f3, bishop h3, then d5, taking the knight, and b3. Black took on the g2, and though black realized his idea and exchanged the white's light squared bishop, the white's position became much better. After the next couple of moves, e6, rook c1, and an exchange on the d5, white has a stable advantage because of the black's weaknesses and the white's more active position. Bishop f4, then white played rook d1, knight c3, and white won the game afterwards. Please take note of the fact that the white's king is in safety and black has no attacking chances at all. Here white is attacking the black's center, while black is trying to counterplay on the king side. Black just played bishop h3, so he is trying to weaken the white's king position. Also, black has the semi-open f-file, and his knight f6 can jump forward somehow. Therefore, it looks like black really has some counterplay. Now let's think about the white's position and what should white do here. Black is going to exchange the white's fianchettoed bishop, and we already know the solution. White needs to put his pawns on the light squares. Thus white can play f3, maybe e4 in the future, and this should stop the black's attack and give white a good position. Moreover, in the current position, white can do it with a tempo. White took on the d6, then after queen takes, bishop c5, queen d5 is the only move because black needs time to remove the rook, f3, rook e8, and e4. White realized his plan with the tempos and now has an excellent position. Queen e6, rook d1, a4, rook d6. White doubled rook on the d-file and has a total domination, and therefore white won this game afterwards pretty easily. You see that white just realized the correct setup of his central pawns, and this neutralized the black's eventual attack at all. Okay, I just have told you a few main and quite important ideas about these type of positions, and now let's draw the conclusions. Here is the first and the main conclusion. Compare the bishop's activity before trading them. It's not important whether a bishop is fianchettoed or not. Make an exchange only when your bishop is less active than your opponent's one. This brings us to the next conclusion. A fianchettoed bishop can be a bad piece. This happens when central pawns are on the same color as the bishop. Of course, you should not exchange an opponent's bad bishop. This will not really weaken your opponent's king. If you increase your opponent's activity, it certainly can't favor your attack. The next conclusion. An exchange of a fianchettoed bishop is really effective when you can attack on a sideline. I mean H or A file. Let's say your opponent castled kingside and has a fianchettoed bishop there. If you can develop an attack on the H file, then you should trade the G7 bishop. In this situation, it will be a really powerful idea. If your opponent traded your fianchettoed bishop, set your pawns on the color of an exchanged bishop. Mainly I'm referring to your central pawns here. This will cover your weak squares and increase the scope of your remaining bishop. These ideas are highly practical and you'll be able to implement them right away. Break your chess stereotypes and then break your opponents. Have a nice day. Goodbye.